May 28, 1940. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring set down the intelligence report with undisguised contempt, his fleshy fingers pushing the document across the polished mahogany desk as if it carried some contagious disease of stupidity. The document detailed President Roosevelt's request to Congress for an unprecedented expansion of American aircraft production, a capacity to manufacture 50,000 planes annually, a number so absurd it bordered on fantasy in Göring's experienced military mind. "The Americans are desperate if they believe such propaganda will frighten us," Göring told his assembled staff, his voice dripping with the casual arrogance that had defined his relationship with facts. "They know nothing of war production. Let them try to convert their automobile factories to aircraft. They will learn that building warplanes requires more than assembly lines and American optimism." The Reichsmarschall leaned back in his chair, supremely confident in his assessment. He had built the Luftwaffe from nothing into Europe's most powerful air force. He understood aviation, understood production, understood what was possible and what wasn't. Americans building 50,000 planes annually. Impossible. Laughable. Desperate propaganda from a nation that didn't understand modern warfare. What Göring failed to grasp, what his ideology and arrogance prevented him from seeing, was that in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him catastrophically, definitively wrong. The former General Motors president, now working for exactly $1 per year as Roosevelt's production chief, was orchestrating the most ambitious industrial transformation in human history, a miracle of organization and will that would bury Nazi Germany under an avalanche of aluminum and steel. Within 4 years, American factories would produce not the impossible 50,000 aircraft Göring had dismissed with contempt, but nearly 100,000 planes annually, while simultaneously supplying 2 theaters of war across opposite oceans, while maintaining civilian production, while transforming American society itself. The proclamation that triggered German contempt came on May 16, 1940, as German panzers raced through France, crushing the French army with speed that shocked even Wehrmacht commanders. Standing before a nervous Congress, still clinging to isolationism, Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared with the confidence that would define his wartime leadership, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." The reaction was skepticism, even among America's closest allies. The British, fighting desperately for survival, wanted to believe but couldn't quite manage it. In 1939, America had produced just 3,611 military aircraft, mostly trainers and obsolete models. The Army Air Corps possessed fewer than 1,700 combat planes, many of them designs that would be death traps against modern Luftwaffe fighters. Yet Roosevelt was demanding a 14-fold increase in production, accomplished in a nation still struggling with Depression-era unemployment, still deeply divided about whether to enter Europe's war at all. It seemed impossible. It seemed like political posturing, the kind of grand statement politicians make without considering actual implementation. But Roosevelt had already chosen the man who would make the impossible real. William Knudsen became the architect of this miracle, a Danish immigrant who embodied everything Nazi ideology said couldn't exist. A foreigner succeeding in America, proving democratic capitalism's superiority through personal achievement rather than racial mythology. When asked who could achieve such impossible production targets, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch responded with absolute certainty. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. Knudsen had abandoned his $300,000 annual salary equivalent to $6 million today to serve his adopted nation for $1 per year, bringing automotive mass production principles to aircraft manufacturing with missionary zeal. He understood what Göring didn't, that American industrial capacity wasn't about individual craftsmanship or small batch excellence, but about systematic organization, interchangeable parts, and assembly line efficiency that could turn complexity into routine. The transformation began immediately. By December 1941, American factories were producing 2,000 military aircraft monthly, a 20-fold increase from 2 years earlier. accomplished while simultaneously retooling for war production across every sector. The Ford Motor Company announced plans for a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan, a facility so ambitious it seemed like science fiction. Boeing expanded its Seattle facilities exponentially. Douglas Aircraft hired thousands of workers weekly. The arsenal of democracy was awakening from its peaceful slumber, and the world would never be the same. The Nazi leadership's dismissal of American capabilities stemmed from both racial prejudice and willful blindness, a toxic combination that would prove fatal. General Friedrich von Boetischer, Wehrmacht military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sent accurate, detailed reports describing American industrial mobilization with the precision of a trained observer. His December 1940 cable warned with prophetic clarity, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights. Their industrial capacity exceeds our understanding." Berlin dismissed these warnings as defeatist exaggeration from a man who'd been corrupted by exposure to American life. When Boetica met Hitler in February 1939 to discuss American industrial potential in person, hoping direct conversation would penetrate where cables had failed, the Führer ranted about American racial degeneracy rather than listening to intelligence assessments based on observable reality. Hitler proclaimed with absolute certainty that Americans were half Judaized, half negrified, and incapable of sustained warfare. A mongrel nation, he insisted, could never match Aryan industrial discipline. This ideological blindness would prove more devastating than any military defeat. The prejudice permeated all levels of Nazi leadership. Luftwaffe intelligence dismissed reports of women entering aircraft factories as signs of American desperation, proof that they were scraping the bottom of their labor barrel, forced to use inferior workers because competent men weren't available. They couldn't conceive that democratic mobilization of all citizens, regardless of gender, might exceed totalitarian command, relying on narrow demographics. When reports arrived of factories running 3 shifts around the clock, German analysts assumed the numbers were exaggerated propaganda. The Nazi worldview simply couldn't accommodate American reality. Ideology had become a prison that prevented them from seeing what was happening until far too late. Ford's Willow Run plant embodied American ambition at its most audacious, most impossible, most transformative. Constructed on farmland beginning April 18, 1941, before America had even entered the war, it became the world's largest factory under one roof, 3.5 million square feet with an assembly line stretching 1 mile from end to end, a distance so vast workers needed bicycles to travel its length. Charles Sorensen, Ford's legendary production chief, the man who'd helped Henry Ford perfect the Model T assembly line, promised to build 1 B-24 Liberator bomber every hour when other factories were managing 1 per day, and considering that an achievement. Initial results were catastrophic, nearly destroying Sorensen's reputation. The first bomber, completed September 1942 amid great ceremony and publicity, required complete rebuilding. It couldn't fly safely. Quality control failures reached 50%. Parts didn't fit. Systems didn't work. By February 1943, Willow Run was producing just 56 bombers monthly against promises of hundreds, becoming a national embarrassment. Critics mockingly dubbed it, "Will It Run?" questioning whether the massive factory would ever function as promised. But Ford engineers persevered with the systematic problem-solving that had revolutionized automotive production. They broke the B-24's 488,193 parts into manageable sub-assemblies. They developed hydraulic riveting tools that reduced human error. They created prefabricated wiring harnesses. They designed moving assembly lines specifically for aircraft. They accommodated 578 design changes in 1943 alone, combat-driven modifications from the European theatre while maintaining and improving production rates, solving problems other factories said were unsolvable. By September 1943, monthly production reached 148 bombers. By December, 365 bombers, more than one daily. The transformation was accelerating beyond anyone's predictions. The breakthrough came in April 1944 when Willow Run produced 428 B-24 seconds, one bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. This single factory was outproducing the entire German aviation industry. Burying Göring's Luftwaffe under American aluminum, German pilots first recognized American production superiority during the Tunisia campaign, experiencing firsthand what intelligence reports had warned about. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter wings, noted in his December 1942 diary with growing alarm, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs flying obsolete aircraft. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day. We shoot down 10 and 20 appear tomorrow." The revelation accelerated through 1943 with mathematical inevitability. January 27, 1943 marked the first American daylight raid on Germany itself. 64 bombers attacking Wilhelmshaven, penetrating the Reich's airspace in broad daylight, announcing America's arrival as an air power. By October 1943, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the Americans lost 60 B-17 seconds to concentrated German fighter attacks, a devastating 20% loss rate that should have ended the daylight bombing campaign according to all military logic. But the bombers were completely replaced within 2 weeks. Every single aircraft, every lost crew replaced by fresh pilots and brand new planes rolling off assembly lines that never stopped, never slowed, never ran short of materials or workers. The mathematics had become inescapable, terrifying, final. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944. The 8th and 15th Air Forces mounted 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft production facilities in a coordinated campaign designed to destroy the Luftwaffe on the ground and in the air. Simultaneously, the Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters shot down. But more critically, approximately 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots, men with thousands of hours of combat experience who couldn't be replaced, regardless of how many planes Germany built. General Adolf Galland, Germany's legendary fighter commander, reported to Göring with numbers that told a story of inevitable defeat. Germany was losing 1,200 fighters monthly while producing only 1,000. The mathematics of attrition were unsustainable. America, meanwhile, was producing 2,500 fighters monthly while losing only 400. They could afford losses that would devastate the Luftwaffe. Every German pilot knew they were fighting an enemy that could replace losses faster than they could inflict them. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, and the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, described a January 1944 mission over Brunswick with the exhausted precision of a man watching his world end. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators, maybe more. The sky was filled with them. We were 8 fighters against fighters, hundreds of bombers, and maybe 1,000 escort fighters. It was hopeless. We attacked anyway because that's what we were trained to do, but we all knew we wouldn't survive the war. It was just a question of when. By 1944, American aircraft production reached proportions that defied German comprehension, that rendered their own impressive production achievements insignificant by comparison. That year alone, American factories produced 96,270 aircraft, 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, 22,591 multi-engine aircraft, thousands of trainers, transports, and specialized aircraft. This single year's production exceeded Germany's entire wartime output of approximately 94,677 aircraft produced from 1,939 through 1,945. But the disparity went far beyond raw numbers into realms of capability and sustainability. Each American bomber carried 13 .50 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds of ammunition. German fighters, facing critical ammunition shortages, increasingly launched with partial loads, sometimes just enough for one engagement. American bombers featured powered turrets that tracked targets automatically, advanced Norden bomb sights that could place bombs within yards of targets from 20,000 feet, and sophisticated navigation equipment, including early radar systems. German fighters, by contrast, often lacked functioning radios. Pilots communicated through hand signals, unable to coordinate tactics, unable to call for help, unable to warn each other of threats. Boeing's Seattle Plant 2 was producing 16 B-17 seconds daily. By May 1944, more heavy bombers in one day than Germany produced in a week across all facilities. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed just 68 people in 1936, had grown to 167,000 workers across 9 facilities spanning California to Oklahoma, producing everything from dive bombers to transport aircraft to fighter planes. North American aviation churned out 500 P-51 Mustangs monthly, the fighter that would break the back of the Luftwaffe, escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, making daylight precision bombing sustainable. Lockheed achieved production of 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, while simultaneously implementing 2,127 combat-driven modifications based on feedback from pilots in Europe and the Pacific continuous, improvement that kept American aircraft technologically current. Supporting industries matched this pace with achievements that multiplied the advantage. General Motors produced 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard built 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins, the superb British engine that powered both Spitfires and P-51 seconds. Alcoa's aluminum output increased 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium production grew from $6 million annually to $333 million. The transformation of America's workforce shattered Nazi preconceptions about race, gender, and industrial capability more completely than any military defeat. Women, comprising less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, represented 65% by 1943, 310,000 women among total aircraft industry workers, fundamentally changing who could build weapons of war. At Douglas Long Beach, 22, 38 of 41, 62 employees were women, performing every job from riveting to final inspection, proving competence had nothing to do with gender. Rose Will Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, whose image became iconic, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy, better than most male workers she'd replaced. Women inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Their attention to detail and systematic approach, improving quality control beyond what the all-male workforce had achieved. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, inadvertently improving efficiency for everyone. Lighter pneumatic tools reduced fatigue. Better positioned workstations decreased injuries. Ergonomics improved across the board. German intelligence interpreted female employment as desperation array. Luftwaffe report, captured in 1944, dismissed these workers as temporary, predicting quality collapse when women proved incapable of sustained precision work. Instead, precision improved. Women excelled at detailed work requiring concentration, wiring, instruments, inspection, assembly of complex systems. Their integration represented democratic strength, not weakness, the ability to mobilize an entire society rather than just half of it. As American production soared, Germany retreated into fantasy solutions that revealed their desperation. Göring authorized the Jaeger program in February 1944, dispersing aircraft production into 729 underground facilities using slave labor from concentration camps, a system that produced more death than airplanes. The Mittelbau-Dora complex near Nordhausen employed 60,000 prisoners in horrific conditions underground, with 20,000 dying from starvation, disease, beatings, and summary executions killed to produce aircraft that would fail in combat. These underground factories produced more defects than aircraft that actually flew. Slave laborers, facing certain death regardless of cooperation, sabotaged components whenever possible. Transportation between dispersed facilities caused constant delays. Quality control collapsed completely as desperate managers pushed quantity over reliability. The entire Mittelbau-Dora complex, built at such tremendous human cost, produced fewer engines monthly than Ford's single Chicago plant-free workers, outproducing slaves by orders of magnitude. Democracy defeating tyranny in the realm of production as surely as on battlefields. Meanwhile, American innovation accelerated rather than stagnating. Boeing developed modular B-29 construction across 4 facilities: Seattle, Wichita, Omaha, and Marietta, with completely interchangeable parts. A wing built in Kansas fit perfectly onto a fuselage built in Georgia. The pressurized B-29 Superfortress, costing $685,000 each. Incorporated technology Germany couldn't match even in prototypes. Pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled gun turrets, advanced fire control systems, and range to strike Japan from bases thousands of miles away. By early 1945, America was producing 100 B-29 seconds monthly, preparing for an invasion of Japan that atomic weapons would make unnecessary. June 6, 1944, demonstrated the culmination of American production in one overwhelming display of air superiority that rendered German resistance futile. The invasion employed 11,590 Allied aircraft against 319 German sorties, a 3-6-1 superiority that wasn't tactical advantage but industrial annihilation, the complete negation of German air power through sheer numbers. This disparity wasn't achieved through better pilots or superior tactics, but through factories that never stopped, production lines that never failed, workers who never quit. Between January and May 1944, preparatory bombing for D-Day dropped 145,000 tons on German targets, exceeding all German bombing of Britain throughout the entire war, delivered in just 5 months. Transport aircraft delivered 3 complete airborne divisions in one day: the 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, and British 6th Airborne, using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet ever possessed simultaneously. By December 1944, single raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. Formations so vast they took hours to pass overhead, darkening the sky like biblical plagues, delivering destruction that no amount of German courage or tactical skill could prevent. P-51 Mustangs possessed range to reach Poland, performance to match any German fighter, and existed in quantities that made losses strategically irrelevant. German pilots called them Indians, swarming everywhere simultaneously, inescapable, overwhelming. As defeat approached with the inevitability of mathematics, even Nazi leadership acknowledged the production catastrophe they'd created through their contempt for American capability. In December 1944, Joseph Goebbels wrote in his private diary with the bitter clarity of a man watching his world collapse. Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem like criminal delusions. We are fighting the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric and racial theory. Erwin Rommel, the desert fox who'd faced American production firsthand in North Africa, told his staff before D-Day with the exhausted honesty of a soldier who understood the truth. The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us with material superiority. When they land in France, they will come with such material abundance that no defensive position can hold indefinitely. Even Hitler, in one of his increasingly rare moments of clarity, admitted to Albert Speer in January 1945. We should have listened to Boetticher's reports from Washington. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds of aircraft, they built tens of thousands. The Americans buried us under production. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, who understood industrial reality better than any Nazi leader, later testified at Nuremberg that American strategic bombing reduced German production by critical margins: 35% reduction in tank production, 31% reduction in aircraft production, 42% reduction in truck production. He stated unequivocally for the historical record, the American attacks, which followed a definite system of assault on industrial targets, caused the systematic breakdown of German armaments production. We couldn't recover because we couldn't replace what they destroyed faster than they could destroy it. Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, operational by mid-1944, represented genuine technological innovation 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter, armed with 430mm cannons that could destroy a bomber with a single burst. Hitler and Göring believed this wonder weapon could restore German air superiority despite catastrophic numerical inferiority, that technology could overcome production. But Germany produced just 1,430 Me-262 seconds total, with never more than 200 operational simultaneously due to fuel shortages, spare parts unavailability, and trained pilot scarcity. The revolutionary Jumo 004 engines required complete overhaul every 10 hours of operation due to material shortages, forcing inferior metal substitutions. Strategic materials like chromium and nickel simply weren't available. America, meanwhile, had begun serious jet development in 1942, benefiting from captured German research but approaching the problem with characteristic systematic thoroughness. While the Bell P-59 Aerocomet proved inferior to German jets, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star superior to any German jet in speed, range, and reliability entered production before war's end. American industrial depth allowed simultaneous pursuit of multiple competing technologies, a luxury Germany couldn't afford. They could develop jets while maintaining conventional fighter production, explore multiple engine designs, test various configurations, all without impacting frontline capabilities. The contrast epitomized the production war's outcome. Germany's technological superiority in jets meant nothing against America's ability to produce thousands of conventional fighters while simultaneously developing next-generation aircraft. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945 by elements of the US 36th Infantry Division marked the beginning of his confrontation with the reality he'd dismissed 5 years earlier with such contempt. Initially defiant at the interrogation facility in Augsburg, he maintained that German technology had been superior, overcome only by numbers, a narrative that protected his ego from admitting the magnitude of his miscalculation. His subsequent transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the dedicated facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, brought intensive interrogation that would strip away his delusions layer by layer. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews, documenting Göring's evolving recognition of American industrial superiority with clinical precision. The transcripts reveal a man struggling to comprehend how thoroughly he'd been wrong. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted to Heckler, his voice lacking its former bombast. "But the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more bombers than our entire bomber force at peak production. It was incomprehensible, literally beyond my ability to imagine." He expressed particular astonishment at American logistics, revealing how completely German thinking had failed to grasp American capabilities. "Your ability to supply military forces across two oceans simultaneously while maintaining domestic production and civilian prosperity. This was beyond our conception. We couldn't adequately supply forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles from America. How do you fight that?" During his trial at Nuremberg, prosecutors presented Göring with overwhelming, undeniable evidence of American production superiority: charts, graphs, photographs, films that documented his catastrophic failure. Charts showed America producing more aircraft monthly by 1944 than Germany managed annually at peak production. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines played on screens, while prosecutors methodically listed German cities destroyed by bombers from that single factory. Göring's March 14, 1946 testimony revealed his struggle to comprehend the scale of American achievement and his own failure. "I believed the economic and technical potential of the United States to be unusually great, particularly regarding the Air Force. But I never imagined, couldn't conceive that they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. Such exponential growth seemed physically impossible, a violation of industrial reality. Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert documented Göring's obsession with production statistics in his private notes. The Reichsmarschall repeatedly calculated ratios, comparing single American factories to Germany's entire production capacity, his mind trying desperately to process numbers that demolished his worldview. He seemed particularly fixated on Willow Run, calling it repeatedly, "that damned factory that broke our backs." When shown that America had produced 812,615 aircraft engines versus Germany's 241,675, Göring simply stared at the figures in silence for several minutes. The mathematical reality of defeat was undeniable, final, crushing. The transformation's scope remains staggering even today. Nearly 80 years later, numbers so vast they still seem almost fictional. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, America produced 295,959 by war's end, 97,810 bombers, including 18,482 B-24 seconds, 12,731 B-17 seconds, 3,970 B-29 seconds, 99,465 fighters, including 15,686 P-51 seconds, 12,275 P-47 seconds, 9,923 P-38 seconds, 98,684 others. Trainers, transports, reconnaissance, specialized aircraft. But systemic dominance in every aspect of production design, materials, assembly, quality control, logistics, and continuous improvement. 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production at peak employment, representing unprecedented workforce diversity that Nazi ideology said would produce chaos. Women who'd been housewives months earlier. African Americans escaping Southern poverty. Mexican Americans facing discrimination. Native Americans from reservations. Disabled workers proving capability. Teenagers who'd left high school. Elderly citizens returning to work. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian command economy could not. Voluntary cooperation that exceeded forced labor's output by every measurable metric. The workforce that entered factories in 1941, knowing nothing about aircraft, emerged in 1945 as the world's most skilled aviation workers. They didn't just build planes, they revolutionized manufacturing itself, creating techniques and principles that transformed global industry. The production miracle didn't end with victory. It launched the American century and created the foundation for post-war dominance. Statistical quality control, developed for bomber production by pioneers like W. Edwards Deming, became standard industrial practice worldwide. Automation principles pioneered at Willow Run transformed global manufacturing. Modern assembly line techniques trace directly to World War II aircraft production. The engineers who designed bomber assembly lines, men like Charles Sorensen and William Knudsen, would later design the Saturn V rocket that took Americans to the moon. The women who riveted B-24 seconds would raise children who became engineers, scientists, and leaders of the space age. The production miracle proved democracy's ability to mobilize completely when facing existential threats, establishing American industrial dominance that would last generations. The financial dimensions defied economic orthodoxy in ways that shocked even American economists. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion in 1,940 seconds dollars, equivalent to approximately $800 billion today. The B-29 program alone cost more than the Manhattan Project that developed atomic weapons. Yet rather than bankrupting America as German economists predicted, war production created unprecedented prosperity that ended the Depression more completely than any New Deal program. Unemployment, which had plagued America throughout the 1,930 seconds, vanished completely. Personal income doubled between 1,940 and 1,945. War bond sales by workers themselves financed much of the expansion. Willow Run workers alone purchased $45 million in bonds, essentially financing their own factories' operations through patriotic investment. Germany, conversely, consumed 40% of its entire industrial capacity for aircraft production by 1944, yet produced less than half American output. Slave labor, increasingly relied upon, proved catastrophically counterproductive. Sabotage was endemic, quality collapsed, productivity per worker actually declined after 1943, while American productivity increased 300%. Beyond raw production lay organizational excellence that multiplied American advantages. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies seamlessly across the nation. IBM punch card machines. Primitive computers tracked millions of components across thousands of suppliers with unprecedented precision. MIT's Radiation Laboratory, employing 4,000 scientists, developed navigation systems giving American bombers all-weather capability German aircraft never achieved. When combat experience revealed B-17 vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing added chin turrets with additional forward-firing guns within 60 days modifications implemented across the entire fleet. When Pacific operations required extended range, consolidated modified B-24 seconds without stopping production, adding range through fuel tank modifications. German modifications took months or years, requiring approval through rigid hierarchies. American improvements took weeks, driven by feedback from combat to factory floors with minimal bureaucracy. This adaptability proved as decisive as production volume. American aircraft evolved continuously based on global combat experience. Information flowed from Pacific battles to Atlantic production lines within days through systematic feedback systems. On October 15th, 1,946 hours before his scheduled execution by hanging, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter, a document that revealed how completely he understood the magnitude of his May 1940 miscalculation. In it, he made his most complete admission of the production war's significance. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess alone. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories, better organization, better utilization of entire national resources. The nation we dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under mountains of aluminum and steel. His last recorded statement to psychologist Gilbert was equally revealing. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they revolutionized production itself. Every aspect of their industrial system proved superior to ours. Organization, innovation, workforce utilization, materials, science, logistics. We had better individual pilots, better individual designs in some cases. They had better factories. In total war, factories matter more than courage. Göring committed suicide that night, using a cyanide capsule he'd hidden for months, but his final testimony stands as history's verdict on the production war. The Reichsmarschall, who had dismissed American capabilities with contempt, died knowing that a single American factory had exceeded his entire Air Force's lifetime production. Military historians universally consider the American production achievement the decisive factor in Allied victory, more important than any battle, any general, any weapon system. Without the overwhelming material superiority it provided, D-Day would have been impossible to execute. The strategic bombing campaign would have been unsustainable. The Pacific War would have been unwinnable. The Soviet Union might have been defeated without American Lend-Lease support. Richard Overy, the leading historian of the air war in Europe, concluded with stark clarity. The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit, tactical brilliance, or even strategic genius, but by the weight of material production. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production that no amount of courage could resist. The numbers support this assessment absolutely and without exception. By 1944, America alone was producing more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined, Axis and allied nations together. This wasn't incremental superiority measured in percentage points. This was order of magnitude dominance that made German resistance mathematically futile. Germany didn't face defeat, they faced obliteration by industrial capacity they couldn't match or counter. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American production capacity in May 1940 stands as history's most catastrophic miscalculation, a moment of arrogance that sealed Nazi Germany's fate more certainly than any military defeat. His contempt for democratic industrial potential cost Germany the war, cost millions of lives, cost his nation its future. His failure to recognize American capabilities doomed the Third Reich before the first American bomber reached German skies. The transformation from 3,611 to 100,000 aircraft annually demonstrated that free societies, when facing existential threats, could achieve what totalitarian regimes deemed impossible. American workers didn't just meet Roosevelt's impossible goal, they doubled it. They didn't just match German production, they exceeded it fivefold while simultaneously fighting in the Pacific, supplying Britain and the Soviet Union, and maintaining civilian prosperity. America in 1940 appeared unprepared for war, isolationist, divided. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial colossus that buried Nazi Germany under 295,959 aircraft, a number so vast that even today it seems almost impossible. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be as decisive as front lines, that assembly workers could be as crucial as soldiers, that industrial mobilization could determine victory as surely as battlefield courage. Hermann Göring learned this lesson too late, at the cost of his nation's complete destruction. From his dismissive reaction to Roosevelt's announcement in May 1940 to his execution at Nuremberg in October 1946, Göring's journey traced the arc of Nazi Germany's annihilation contempt, transforming into comprehension too late to matter. The Reichsmarschall, who had laughed at American aircraft production, died knowing that American factories had produced more planes in 1944 alone than Germany managed throughout the entire war. His mockery of democratic industrial capacity became history's most expensive joke, paid for in the currency of total defeat, proving forever that free peoples united in righteous cause can bury tyranny under an avalanche of production. Hermann Göring laughed at the idea of America producing 50,000 planes annually. America responded by producing twice that many, transforming global history in the process. His laughter echoed through history as the sound of catastrophic miscalculation, the fatal dismissal of democracy's arsenal by a man who understood neither democracy nor production. In the end, American factories buried him and everything he represented under 300,000 aircraft, turning his contempt into history's most complete defeat.